My mom made up the golden child rule. Only the top student got to eat dinner. I watched my younger brother starve because he had dyslexia. This happened between 2005 to 2010 when I was 8 to 13, and my brother Danny was 6 to 11. I'm 27 now, and Danny is 25, and we're both still dealing with the psychological damage from what our mother did to us. I need to warn people that the story involves child abuse and deliberate starvation of a learning disabled child. It's hard for me to write, but I think people need to understand what happens when academic achievement becomes more important than basic human needs. My mother, Patricia, now 58, was obsessed with academic success. She had a master's degree in education and worked as a high school administrator, so she considered herself an expert on child development and learning. She believed that motivation and competition were the keys to excellence, and she was determined to raise high-achieving children who would reflect well on her parenting abilities. The golden child rule started when I was in 3rd grade and Danny was in 1st grade. Mom announced it at dinner one Sunday evening like it was some kind of exciting family innovation. Starting this week, we're implementing a new system to encourage academic excellence, she said, using her professional educator voice. Every week, whichever child has the highest grades gets to eat dinner with the family. The other child will need to wait until homework is completed and reviewed. My dad, who was typically passive about Mom's educational initiatives, just nodded along. Sounds like a good motivation tool, he said. At 8 years old, I didn't fully understand what this meant. It sounded like some kind of game where the winner got a special privilege. What if we tie? I asked. Then you both eat dinner, Mom said. But I expect you to push each other to be your best. Danny, who was 6 and struggling to understand basic reading concepts, raised his hand like he was in school. What if I don't know my homework? Then you'll need to keep trying until you figure it out, Mom said firmly. No giving up in this family. The first week I won. I was naturally good at school and had gotten all A's on my weekly progress report. Danny had gotten mostly C's and D's, with a note from his teacher about needing extra help with reading. That Tuesday night, I sat at the dinner table with my parents, eating Mom's homemade lasagna, while Danny sat in the living room with his homework spread out on the coffee table. Every few minutes, he'd come to the dining room doorway to show Mom his work. This isn't right, she'd say, barely glancing at his paper. Try again. I remember feeling uncomfortable watching Danny go back to the living room, his shoulders sagging. The lasagna didn't taste as good as usual. Mom, can Danny have some food? I asked. Danny can eat when he finishes his work correctly, she said. This is how we learn responsibility. Danny didn't finish his homework until almost 9 p.m., well past his normal bedtime. By then, the lasagna was cold and congealed. He ate it anyway, shoving big bites into his mouth like he was afraid it might disappear. The second week, I won again. And the third week, Danny was falling further behind in school, and his teacher started sending home notes about his difficulty with reading and his increasing behavioral problems in class. Danny seems distracted and tired, one note read. He's also been asking other students to share their snacks. Is he eating enough at home? Mom threw that note away without responding. By the 4th week, I was starting to understand the pattern. I would eat dinner at 6 p.m. while Danny worked on homework. He would usually finish around 8 or 9 p.m. if he finished at all. Some nights, Mom would declare his work inadequate and send him to bed without dinner. He'll do better tomorrow when he's motivated, she'd tell Dad. I started sneaking food to Danny when our parents weren't looking. I'd hide crackers or fruit in my backpack and give them to him after school. He was always hungry, always tired, and his grades were getting worse instead of better. I can't read the words, he told me one night while crying over a homework assignment. They move around on the page. I tried to help him, but I was only 9 years old and didn't understand why reading seemed so hard for him when it was easy for me. I would sound out words for him, but when he tried to read them himself, he'd mix up letters or skip words entirely. The worst part was watching Mom's reaction to his struggles. Instead of recognizing that he might need help, she became more convinced that he was lazy and not applying himself. Danny needs to learn that success requires effort, she would say. If I make things too easy for him, he'll never develop a strong work ethic. By November of that first year, Danny had lost noticeable weight. His clothes were hanging loose on him, and he was constantly tired. His teacher called home, several times expressing concern about his energy levels and his inability to focus in class. "Have you considered having Danny evaluated for learning disabilities?" his teacher asked during a parent conference. "Some of his symptoms suggest he might have dyslexia." Mom was offended by the suggestion. "Danny doesn't have a disability," she said firmly. "He just needs to work harder." Too many parents these days want to make excuses for their children instead of pushing them to excel. The teacher tried to explain that learning disabilities were real neurological differences, not character flaws, but Mom shut down the conversation. "I have a master's degree in education," she said. "I think I know how to motivate my own children." That night, Mom instituted additional rules. If Danny's grades didn't improve by the end of the month, he would also lose Saturday breakfast privileges. If they still didn't improve, he'd lose Sunday lunch as well. "Maybe hunger will be the motivation he needs," she told Dad while they thought I wasn't listening. "I started having stomach aches and nightmares. I felt guilty every time I sat down to eat dinner while Danny worked on homework that seemed impossible for him. I felt guilty for being naturally good at school when he struggled so much. Most of all, I felt guilty for not standing up to Mom, but I was 10 years old and terrified that if I said anything, she might implement the same rules for me." The breaking point came in December. Danny had missed 3 dinners that week, and Mom was threatening to take away his breakfast privileges. On Friday night, he fell asleep at the kitchen table while trying to complete a reading worksheet. When Mom found him there at 10 p.m., she woke him up by slamming her hand on the table. "This is unacceptable," she said. "Go to bed. No dinner tonight, and no breakfast tomorrow. Maybe that will teach you to manage your time better." Danny started crying. "I'm trying, Mom. I really am. The letters don't make sense." "Don't make excuses," she said coldly. "Your sister manages to get her work done just fine." That night, I heard Danny crying in his room. I snuck him a granola bar from my emergency stash, but it wasn't enough. He was skeletal thin and constantly exhausted. The next morning, Danny collapsed in the bathroom while getting ready for school. When Danny collapsed, I was the one who found him. He was lying on the bathroom floor, conscious but too weak to stand up. His skin was pale and clammy, and he kept saying he felt dizzy. I screamed for Mom and Dad. Dad carried Danny to the couch, while Mom stood in the doorway, looking annoyed rather than concerned. "Is he being dramatic?" she asked. "Because if this is an attempt to get out of consequences." "He can barely lift his head," Dad said, his voice sharp in a way I'd rarely heard. "Look at him, Patricia. Really look at him." For the first time in months, Mom seemed to actually see Danny. He was probably 15 pounds underweight, his collarbones jutting out sharply, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like the photos of malnourished children in charity advertisements. "Maybe we should take him to the doctor," Dad said. "It's probably just a stomach bug," Mom said, but her voice was less certain. "Kids get sick all the time." Dad took Danny to urgent care anyway. The doctor immediately asked about his eating habits and weight loss. When Dad explained Mom's academic motivation system, the doctor's expression became very serious. "Your son is malnourished," the doctor told Dad. "His blood sugar is dangerously low, and he's showing signs of chronic nutritional deficiency." "Has he been eating regular meals?" Dad had to admit that no, Danny had been missing dinners multiple times per week for several months. The doctor was required to file a report with Child Protective Services. When they came home, Dad confronted Mom in a way I'd never seen before. "The doctor says Danny is malnourished," he said. "There's a CPS worker coming to interview us tomorrow." Mom immediately went into damage control mode. "It's not that serious," she said. "The doctor is overreacting. Danny has been eating, just not always at traditional times. He collapsed from hunger, Patricia. Our 6-year-old son collapsed from hunger because you decided grades were more important than food. I was motivating him to succeed. Everything I did was for his own good. You were starving him." That night, Mom cooked a huge dinner and insisted we all eat together as a family. She acted like nothing had happened, chatting cheerfully about our school day and asking Danny about his friends. It was surreal watching her pretend to be a normal, caring mother after months of systematic cruelty. The CPS worker arrived the next afternoon. She interviewed my parents separately, then talked to Danny and me alone. "Has your mom ever kept food away from you?" she asked Danny gently. Danny looked terrified. "I'm not supposed to tell," he whispered. You're not in trouble, the worker said. I just need to understand what's been happening. Danny told her about the golden child rule, about missing dinners, about being hungry all the time. I confirmed everything he said and told her about the food I'd been sneaking to him. Your mom made your brother earn food by getting good grades, the worker asked me. She said it would motivate him, I said, but he couldn't help it that reading was hard for him. The worker also spoke to Danny's teacher, who confirmed that he'd been showing signs of hunger and fatigue for months. She tried to provide extra snacks when possible, but she'd been concerned about the situation at home. CPS opened a formal investigation. A supervisor came to our house to assess the living conditions and interview our parents again. Mom put on her professional educator persona, talking about innovative parenting strategies and high expectations for academic achievement. So you withheld meals from your son based on his school performance? The supervisor asked. I provided motivation for improvement, Mom said. I have a master's degree in education. I understand child development and learning theory. Did you consider that your son might have a learning disability? I don't believe in labeling children, Mom said. I believe in holding them to high standards. The supervisor was not impressed by Mom's credentials or her justifications. The investigation concluded that while our home was otherwise adequate, Mom's treatment of Danny constituted educational neglect and failure to provide adequate nutrition. CPS mandated family counseling, regular check-ins, and required that Danny be evaluated for learning disabilities. Mom was furious about the CPS intervention. She blamed Danny for making the family look bad and me for not supporting her parenting methods. But she was also terrified of losing custody, so she complied with all the requirements. Danny's evaluation confirmed what his teacher had suspected. He had severe dyslexia and processing disorders that made traditional learning extremely difficult. The educational psychologist explained that his struggles had nothing to do with motivation or effort. Danny's brain processes written language differently, she told our parents. Punishment and food restriction won't change his neurology. He needs specialized instruction and support. Mom sat through the meeting in stony silence. When the psychologist finished explaining Danny's needs, Mom's first question was, "So you're saying he's disabled?" "I'm saying he has learning differences that require different teaching methods," the psychologist clarified. With proper support, children with dyslexia can be very successful academically. But he'll always be behind other children? Not necessarily. Many people with dyslexia excel in areas like creative thinking, problem solving, and visual spatial skills. Albert Einstein and Richard Branson both had dyslexia. Mom clearly wasn't convinced. To her, Danny's diagnosis was confirmation that he was defective, not explanation for why her methods had been harmful and ineffective. The family counseling was a disaster. The therapist tried to help Mom understand the psychological damage she'd caused and develop healthier approaches to supporting our academic development. But Mom spent most sessions defending her actions and blaming external factors. "I was trying to prepare them for a competitive world," she'd say. "Success requires sacrifice and hard work. Starving a child with a learning disability isn't preparing him for success," the therapist would respond. "It's traumatizing him. I never starved anyone. I delayed meals until educational goals were met." The semantic arguments went on for months. Mom could not, or would not acknowledge that what she'd done was abusive. In her mind, she was a dedicated mother who had high expectations for her children's achievement. Danny started receiving specialized tutoring for his dyslexia, and his reading slowly began to improve. But the psychological damage was harder to address. He developed severe anxiety around food and academic performance. He would hoard snacks in his backpack and under his bed, terrified that meals might be taken away again. He also developed what the therapist called learned helplessness around schoolwork. Even with proper support and accommodations, he would panic when faced with assignments, convinced that failure would result in punishment. As for me, I struggled with survivor's guilt and hyperresponsibility. I felt guilty for every meal I'd eaten while Danny went hungry. I became obsessed with taking care of him, sneaking him food, even when it wasn't necessary anymore. I also became a perfectionist in school, terrified that if my grades slipped, Mom might reinstate her system. The Golden Child rule officially ended after the CPS investigation, but its effects lasted for years. Mom continued to favor me academically while treating Danny like a burden. She'd make comments about how some children just aren't cut out for academic success and how she was realistic about Danny's limitations. When I got into honor classes, Mom bragged to everyone about her gifted daughter. When Danny needed extra help or accommodations, she'd sigh dramatically and talk about the challenges of parenting a special needs child. She never apologized to Danny for what she'd done, never acknowledged that her methods had been cruel or counterproductive. Instead, she repositioned herself as a martyr who was doing her best with a difficult child. The long-term effects of the golden child rule have followed both Danny and me into adulthood. We're both in therapy now, working through different but related trauma from our childhood. Danny, now 25, struggles with anxiety, depression, and complex PTSD. He has a complicated relationship with food, sometimes hoarding it, sometimes forgetting to eat when he's stressed. He's incredibly intelligent and creative, but he still battles the internalized belief that he's not smart enough or too much work. He did eventually finish high school with accommodations and went to community college, where he discovered a talent for graphic design. He's working as a freelance designer now and doing well professionally, but he still has panic attacks when facing deadlines or criticism. "I feel like I'm always waiting for someone to take something away from me," he told me recently. "Like success is conditional and can be revoked if I mess up." He's been no contact with our mother for 3 years now. She continued to make comments about his limitations and special needs well into his 20s, never recognizing his actual talents and achievements. "She broke something in me," he said during one of our conversations. "I know intellectually that I'm capable and talented, but emotionally, I still feel like that little kid who couldn't read and didn't deserve dinner." As for me, I've struggled with perfectionism, people-pleasing, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility for other people's well-being. I became a social worker, partly because I couldn't stop thinking about kids like Danny who might be suffering in silence. I also struggle with guilt about my role in the dynamic. Even though I was just a child myself, I feel like I could have done more to protect Danny. I could have told a teacher earlier, or refused to participate in Mom's system, or been braver about speaking up. My therapist has helped me understand that I was also a victim of Mom's abuse, even though it looked different. Being forced to watch your siblings suffer while you receive privileges is its own form of trauma. Being used as a weapon against your brother, being made to feel like love and food are conditional on performance, these things damage me too. But Danny bears no resentment toward me for the advantages I received. "You were a kid too," he's told me, "and you tried to help me when you could. You're not responsible for what Mom did." Our father, who remained passive throughout most of our childhood, has expressed regret about not intervening sooner. "I should have stopped her," he told us both during a family therapy session. "I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid to challenge her. I failed both of you." Dad's acknowledgement of his role has helped somewhat, but it doesn't undo the years of damage. Mom, however, remains unrepentant. She still believes her methods were justified and that any negative outcomes are due to Danny's disability rather than her treatment of him. "I had high standards," she said during one of our last conversations before Danny went no contact. "I refused to apologize for wanting my children to succeed." "You starved him," I said bluntly. "You literally starved a learning disabled child because he couldn't meet your arbitrary academic standards." "I never starved anyone," she replied, using the same semantic arguments she'd used in therapy. "I implemented consequence-based learning." She cannot see the difference between consequence-based learning and child abuse. To this day, she views herself as a dedicated educator who was ahead of her time in recognizing the importance of academic achievement. I have limited contact with her now. I see her on holidays and special occasions, but I've made it clear that any criticism of Danny or discussion of his limitations will result in me leaving immediately. She's learned to keep her opinions to herself around me, but I know she still believes she was right. The most heartbreaking part is that Danny is incredibly talented and successful despite what she did to him, not because of it. His creativity, empathy, and resilience are remarkable. He's overcome learning disabilities, childhood trauma, and systematic psychological abuse to build a fulfilling life and career. If Mom had just fed him dinner and gotten him appropriate academic support, he would have reached the same place with far less suffering. Her motivation system didn't create success. It created trauma that he's still working to overcome. I think about other families where academic pressure might be crossing the line into abuse. How many kids are going hungry because their grades aren't good enough? How many learning disabled children are being punished for neurological differences they can't control? The competitive pressure around academics has only gotten worse since our childhood. Parents are more anxious than ever about their children's educational achievement, and some are willing to use increasingly extreme methods to motivate performance. But withholding basic needs like food, shelter, or affection based on academic performance isn't motivation, it's abuse. Children are not employees who need to earn their basic rights. They're human beings who deserve unconditional love and support, especially when they're struggling. Danny's dyslexia wasn't a character flaw that needed to be punished out of him. It was a neurological difference that needed understanding and accommodation. Mom's inability to see that difference and her decision to blame him for struggling nearly destroyed him. I'm sharing this story because I want people to understand where the line is between high expectations and abuse. Wanting your children to succeed is normal and healthy. Creating systems where they have to earn basic necessities is not. If you're a parent reading this, please remember that your child's worth isn't determined by their grades. If you're a teacher or other professional who works with children, please speak up if you see signs that a child isn't getting adequate nutrition or care at home. And if you're someone who grew up in a household where love and care were conditional on performance, please know that you deserved better. Your worth was never tied to your achievements, and you didn't deserve to suffer just because you struggled. Danny and I are still healing, but we're building lives based on unconditional love and support for each other. We're breaking the cycle of conditional worth that our mother tried to instill in us. It's taken years, but we're finally learning that we deserve dinner regardless of our grades. TLDR, my mother implemented a golden child rule where only the child with the highest grades each week got to eat dinner with the family. My dyslexic younger brother was systematically starved for months while struggling with undiagnosed learning disabilities. The abuse only stopped when he collapsed from malnutrition and CPS intervened. We're both still dealing with the psychological damage as adults.